Hey guys, let's make a comic book. So I'm starting a new video series because I'm starting a new book project, and I thought that I would start from the beginning and share with you guys my process and talk it through. So I'm going to try to check in each week, share a little behind the scenes on what I'm doing, explain my process, where I'm at in the process at that time, and you can see a book develop. And hopefully that's instructional to you as you see how I do it. So I'm going to start by kind of explaining where I'm at. So I've got a couple different book series out there. I've got Super Siblings, which is one that I started many years ago. In book form, in my trade book form, I have Clash of the Tweens and Field Trip. And I kind of let that sit for the past couple seasons because I had two other ideas that I really wanted to get out. And the first was Stray. That one is my little story about a wild coyote and his wild imagination. And then most recently, Ninja Pig. Now, Ninja Pig was a story that started from an idea I had way back in middle school. Of course, heavily inspired by the Ninja Turtles themselves. But I started doodling Ninja Pig in my school notebooks way back when. And a friend of mine recently challenged me, said, whatever happened to Ninja Pig? And I thought the same thing. I thought, well, yeah, whatever happened to Ninja Pig? I had so much fun with him. And so, for pure vanity and for having fun, I decided like I said, last season to make the Ninja Pig book. And so I started Ninja Pig. And I've been trying to decide which book I'm going to work on next. Because honestly, as a teacher and with everything else going on, I have a limited amount of time. And so I have to kind of pick and choose which book is exciting me at the moment. And that's, I guess, the very, very first initial part of my creative process is which one is tickling my fancy right now. I always have ideas floating around in my head. Happens a lot, frankly, and I don't know if it's just a distracted mind, but it especially happens when I'm busy and I have lots of mundane tasks or work, real work going on. My mind wanders and I start thinking about something fun. And stories tend to pop into my mind at that time. And for whatever reason, I feel like something shifted in my head and Super Siblings popped up again. So that's going to be my next book, Super Siblings 3. And these are my trade books. And like I said, they are now in trade format. So they are illustrated books with a little bit of text and prose in them. I like that size and format for Super Siblings, especially because Super Siblings is a little bit of a storybook. So it's a different shift when I write Super Siblings than when I just did Ninja Pig. So what that means is for Super Siblings, I need to actually write a full, not a full book. It's not a novel, but a full script, and it's written like a young adult or teen focused book. So it's all text, and so I've got to write that. The first thing, obviously, is that idea. What's the story going to be about? And so I'm going to share with you my Google Doc. Here we have the very first version of my new Google Doc I just opened and created for Super Siblings 3. Now, if you're following Super Siblings and you've read the first two books, um, Field Trip was the first book when the grandparents revealed their latent superpowers that have been hidden. And the kids, who also have superpowers, now understand where they inherited um, their powers and their attitudes about fighting crime or creating crime, right? So now I have that loose end to pick up in this story, but I need to give my story a place and a time. So if I step back a few years, we're talking 5 or 6 years, when Super Siblings was a comic book, I was preparing ideas for what my next comic would be for Super Siblings. And at that time, I was doing 12 to 20 page comics, traditional comics. And I did that for a number of years. But when I shifted over to storytelling in book form, I decided to go back and retell original comic book stories in this new book format. Well, fast forward to today, the way those stories have progressed and the way the story has gone by, I've decided that I need to pick up some of those loose ends from the comic book and put it into the next book. And specifically, the idea I had was that they were going to be going on a trip to Hawaii. And I had fully scripted the comic, and I may eventually do that comic someday again if I have time. But I'm going to pick up that idea because it had some really cool scenes in it. So one in particular was I had them flying as a family to Hawaii, and somehow or another, Banshee got involved with cloning, a la Jurassic Park, and you've got dinosaurs, and you've got all these things. And I had some ideas where I'd play around with some of the more common, famous scenes from Jurassic Park, like a dinosaur in the mirror and things happening, or the raptors chasing the family. And so some of those things I wrote into the comic book story. And so I thought, okay, good. This is going to be where I can pick up and build on this outline, the story outline for the new book. So Hawaii is the context. The family's going to Hawaii, and I believe that Banshee, a la Courtney, is going to set herself up for being upset about something and get involved with some secret lab that's doing genetic testing on dinosaurs, and fun ensues, right? We'll see where that goes. Also, with the way the books are written, there is kind of like an A plot and a B plot. There's kind of an introductory little story, and then the bigger story happens in the subsequent chapters. It's kind of like an introduction story and then kind of conclusion story because there's more pages. Each of these books is over 100 pages, and so I kind of divide the story into those parts. So more than just the adventure to Hawaii, that's like the main story. That's like the A plot. The B plot, the shorter bit, is going to involve the grandparents. And so this is where I'm going to do maybe a flashback or kind of a somehow include a memory from the grandparents that shows what their adventures were like because they're retired superheroes and supervillain. And we just learned that in the last book. So I need to pick that up and include that somehow. So I had some ideas about should I show them in the back in the past with a flashback? Should it be something in the current story reminds them and so they have a memory together? Also, one of the main story points with super siblings is that the kids have superpowers, but they never learned each other's secret identity. So Scout, Conrad, uses his powers for good. Courtney, his sister, uses hers for bad. She became the villain, he became the hero, and they fight each other, but they don't realize they're brother and sister. And that was always the funny little play I had with super siblings. Um, the same idea exists with the grandparents. Because superpowers skip a generation, mom and dad Clark have no powers, but grandma and grandpa Clark do. Well, they also had secret identities, didn't know each other, got married, and wound up having the hero and the villain married. So eventually they figured it out and they retired and gave up crime and crime fighting so they could have a family life. But I haven't fully told that story and I haven't really figured out how that happened. And I think that part of the story has to be developed over the subsequent books. So I need to figure out which part to share so that I can move the story along, those memories of those characters, but then also not take away from the main plot, which is going to be a Scout and Banshee adventure in Hawaii. So those are the things I'm playing with. And what you see in my Google Doc is random thoughts at this point. What I like to do is write down my notes. And for the past little while, I've been dumping, copying and pasting things from previous scripts, just dropping in notes. It's all random. There is no real structure to this right now. In fact, a lot of times when I write, what I'll do is I'll take my old chapter outline from the previous book, I'll copy and paste it in, and then I'll start editing that. It's a strange thing that for me, writing is editing. So I don't just start with a blank page. I start with something I've previously written and I build off of that. So I erase old paragraphs and put in new ones and I start making a list. And so typically for these books, I'm used to having about 12 pages. I'm sorry, 12 chapters, over 100 pages. And, the first introduction happens in the first two chapters. Then, chapter three, you start building up to the main plot. And then the subsequent chapters are finishing that story. And so I'm going to follow that format. So I plug in those chapters and then I start adding in my notes. And you can kind of see here in this one, I've got the Apollo mission and the Wraith and so on. That was in the very first book. And so this outline came from there. I also always have in here somewhere kind of like my three-act structure. I tend to follow that three-act structure where you have your introduction, your crisis, your, main drama, conflict, and then resolution. I try to follow that format and I basically kind of divide it up that way in the chapters. If I do 12 chapters, then I kind of do four chapters for the beginning, middle, and the end. Act one, two, three. Um, I don't think you have to be that deliberate and that specific about numbering your chapters and fitting them into those pieces. But like I said, that structure gives me a place to start. I don't use it as a way to restrict myself, so it has to be written this way. It's just a way to start. So I start organizing things. And so the random thoughts I've had, I start dumping into those different areas. Just my outline. I start dumping in, oh, Courtney says this. That sounded funny. Boom, drop it in there. Conrad, I see something in my mind. Conrad punching a shark. Boom, put it in there. Okay. I just list out those random things that came to mind and I start organizing it. That's where I am this week. I'm trying to collect all this random information, shape it into an outline. Once I have the outline put together, that's when I start actually writing. So the first week, maybe two, is going to be outlining, structuring the chapters, figuring out what I want to happen in each story, the main plot points, and that's all going to be written in outline. Once that's done, then I can actually go and start to write. And I start to write from start to finish. I do chapter one, chapter two, chapter three, and so on. Another thing that kind of helps me is naming my chapters. So I will use the outline to help me come up with a silly name for the chapter. Um, I like doing that because it's a shorthand for telling me what I need to accomplish in that chapter. Now, will those chapter names stick? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I like the cleverness of that if I can come up with a clever title for a chapter that works. So I don't really have any cool images to share this week. I don't have anything like that. Don't have my sketching and doodles yet. I'll be doing that once I do the outline. I'll start thinking about and thumbnailing what's going to happen inside the book. But I really have to get my arms around what's going to happen. And like I said, I've given myself a few loose ends from book two. Also, some previous ideas for previous stories that never materialized. Those are going to be thrown into the mix, and then we'll see where this goes. So that's my check-in. This week, I'm writing the outline, and once I have more of a developed outline, I will share it with you next week and see how I progress because I really want to make progress on that this month, and we'll see what happens. All right, see you next time.